Let's now go into further detail about the general response within the innate immune system. So, our learning intention for today is that I can recognize that the innate or non specific immune system is the second line of defense with responses that are non specific. So, we went through the physical barriers, which is technically also part of the innate immune system, and we talked about how that was the first line of defense. But what happens when something actually manages to get into our inside of our bodies and breach those physical and chemical barriers? Well, that's when they encounter our innate immune system, which is the second line of defense. So you'll find something called white blood cells, which are found in our circulatory and respiratory systems, as well as our interstitial fluid. So within them, we've got our different responses. So we've got some phagocytes. So they recognize, ingest, and kill microbes via phagocytosis. Remember when we are talking about our self and non-self video, phagocytosis is kind of like the engulfing or consumption of foreign material. Cytotoxic cells, well, they got the name toxic, so they'll recognize and kill infected cells. And then finally, we've got inflammatory cells. So these send out chemical signals that recruit our phagocytes. So they kind of call at them to come and ingest the pathogens, as well as signal our antibody secreting cells and cytotoxic cells to the infected area. So they're all very important in terms of our innate immune system. So, some of our proteins can act against different types of pathogens. So, for example, we've got lysozyme. So, that is an enzyme in lysosomes, which are responsible for breaking down and destroying pathogens. Some other ones are interferons. So, these are proteins that prevent the spread of viruses, and they're secreted by cells. Which trigger nearby cells to form their own antivirus chemicals. So these interferons are pretty much kind of signals that go out and try to call others to the site of infection. We've also got complement, so this is also another protein in the blood that assists in inflammation and destroying pathogens. So all very important. So, as I was saying in the previous slide, so interferons are signaling proteins which are secreted by cells that have a virus in them, as you can see here. So, what happens is that this virus might just infect any normal cell, and what happens is that the human cell is actually alert and aware of this. And what happens is that it will then signal these interferons to go out and into neighboring cells to actually warn them about the different viruses that are about. So, what happens is that these interferons do activate immune cells, but for our normal cells that have them, it encourages them to go through something called apoptosis. Now, apoptosis, as you can see here, is pretty much cell death or cell suicide. So the cell is purposely killing itself to reduce the chances of the virus to be able to use our mechanisms to be able to reproduce. Right, and we learned all about how viruses reproduced previously. So, the result of these white blood cells, complement proteins, and interferons working together results in inflammation. And we know what inflammation looks like. I'm sure we've all particularly experienced it if we've ever sprained an ankle or a wrist or anything, or we've got bitten and like something all flares up. That is actually our human immune system at play. So, our complement system is pretty much made of a variety of proteins that circulate in our blood when they are not active. When they are active, though, they kind of initiate this complement cascade, which allows for the following steps to happen. So, opsonization is pretty much that foreign particles are marked for phagocytosis. So, do you remember when we looked at that MHC complex or the major histocompatibility complex, where it was able to actually, um, I guess, flag the antigen of the foreign particle. So it's actually flagging cells that might be infected and kind of familiarizing what should or shouldn't be digested by the phagocytes. The next thing that happens is chemotaxis. So this is the attraction and movement of macrophages to a chemical signal. Okay, so it's actually really trying to attract all of these different immune cells to a particular area. Another protein is the cell lysis. So of course, lysis meaning that it is pretty much uh, destroying the membrane of foreign particles by puncturing them. Okay, so it weakens them and it kind of makes them, I guess, in a cell sense, bleed out, even though cells don't have blood, but they do, they start spilling out all their insides. Essentially, so that they are unable to multiply or reproduce because they are weakened. And then finally, the final bit of our complement system is agglutination. Key word or key part of this word I want you to think about is the glue, right? Agglutination. So it's sticking all of the, or it's attempting to stick all of the either foreign particles or infected cells together and clump them up to actually make it easier for our immune system and all the white blood cells to attack, right? Because it's a lot harder to try and attack an immune system if all of the foreign particles are all spread out everywhere. It's a lot easier if they're corralled into like a smaller area for our white blood cells to be able to attack. So, before I was mentioning the inflammation response, of course, this is due to our body trying to bring more blood and fluid to the site of infection and damage. Now, I want you to think about that bringing more blood and fluid to the site. Our white blood cells and things like that do, and a lot of our immune system or components of our immune system kind of circulate within our blood and within the lymphatic system, right? So, by having some inflammation, it is allowing more immune cells and stuff access to the site of infection, whether or not that be of a pathogen or in general of an injury, right? So, of course, inflammation does increase blood flow, so that brings factors that cause clotting. So, we want clotting to make sure that there's no more pathogens that are going to get in, and we're trying to prevent pathogens from moving to other parts of the body. Okay. Um, by increasing that blood flow again, it's delivering phagocytes for the destruction of pathogens. Okay, so we're allowing more things to get through and into where we need them most. Fluid collects in the area to remove cell debris, which causes swelling and an increase in temperature. But thinking about, well, we know that our body, becomes inflamed due to an immune response, but what actually is triggering this, right? So I've got here damaged tissues, right? So maybe this here, I'd say, I'm going to say it's maybe a bee sting that's come through. Once your tissues get damaged, they do release this chemical called histamine, right? And it is responsible for dilating our blood capillaries. So that's down here. Here's our blood capillaries near the site of injury to increase that blood flow. Okay. And it also increases the permeability of the capillaries, causing fluid and phagocytes to enter tissues, right? So here's like, I guess you can see it off the picture a little bit. We've got maybe the normal width of our blood cells. Histamines are starting to get released due to this open wound that has come about. So now our blood cells have dilated, okay, and it is allowing easier permeability of our white blood cells and everything to be able to come in and start working to, make sure that there's nothing bad at the site and to try and clear out anything that's dead or things like that. And then, of course, we've got our platelets and things too. It's just a key thing to just think about here. Phagocytes don't only just ingest pathogens, they do also digest dead cells. So, of course, there might be some cells that have died in this wound, as well as any cellular debris or pathogens and bacteria that have gotten through. So again, here is our summary of our second line of defense. So inflammatory response, phagocytes, so fever, so the temperature heating up to try and help kill things, the natural killer cells, we've got complement system and interferons. So next video we will be looking at our acquired immune system.